Hey everybody, my name is Trevor Spires, and today is going to be the first in hopefully a multi-part series on not how NSX works, but how an organization or an individual would operationalize their NSX firewall. So I'm going to get right into it today. We're going to start with how you would implement zone-based firewall, which is really where we start. I'm going to walk you through the kind of the ideal starting point to implement a solution like this, and then hopefully over the next few videos we'll build up and iterate on that to where we can actually get all the way to showing you how to implement a zero trust architecture for some of your more critical applications. So for today, we're going to be exclusively focusing on how you'll deploy zone-based firewalling, or you may also hear it called macro-segmentation within NSX, okay? I couldn't resist making a joke. The joke that I always make with customers is, you talk to organizations, you hear a lot about ML and AI. Well, you know what? A lot of times those solutions are pretty good, but I've also seen a lot of times they're not so good. Right. And the conclusion that I've come to after years of working with firewalls and IPS solutions is that, generally speaking, logs are smarter than machine learning. Okay. And maybe it's not fully true, but I do think that there is some merit to the fact that you can oftentimes, through a combination of knowing a little bit about your environment and using logs, implement a solution like this faster than if you relied solely on some ML algorithm to learn your whole infrastructure for you. Logs are this nice medium point to where you can put some human input, some existing knowledge of your infrastructure into the solution, so that way you can get back some responses based on what you already know about your systems. So the reason I'm starting the series with zone segmentation is because it really would be like the low-hanging fruit for implementing a firewall like the NSX firewall, okay? I would call it kind of like the ideal starting point, and what I'll oftentimes tell customers I work with are you're going to get the quickest time to value in a solution like this by implementing zone segmentation, okay? So I'll usually walk customers through this four-step process where we start with implementing zones and rules for their shared services. Then we'll turn on, if they need the IDPS features, we'll turn on the IDPS to do deep packet inspection within their environment to get some visibility that maybe they didn't have before. And then we'll start talking about isolating applications, or even micro-segmentation, or implementing zero trust security around your particular applications. Today, we're going to be focusing on step one, right? How do I get started? What do I do first? Well, hey, I would say the first thing you should probably do, assuming you don't already have decent zone-based security implemented already, or even if your existing zones just have room to improve, definitely start with that zone-based segmentation use case that we're going to cover in this video. Okay, so what are you looking at right now? You are looking at a network that has a lot of different apps, but really doesn't have any zones, right? We've just got this all too common flat kind of general compute VLAN, and we've also got a DMZ VLAN, right? And so there is DMZ and internal segmentation, sure, obviously not such a bad idea to separate your DMZ, but still we're able to see how if, for example, this application, this red application on the left, were compromised, that somebody could use that compromised box to move throughout the DMZ, and the same applies to these internal systems as well, right? So oftentimes there is a need to implement guardrails and more refined security policy around an environment like this. And your environment probably is more complex than this, but still, if there is room for you to implement zones, you could follow this process that we're going to walk through today, okay? So the very first thing you do when you get NSX is that you install it in your VMware environment, right? So really what that means is that the first thing we'll do is install a little firewall on every single interface of every single VM in your environment, okay? By default, that firewall is in an allow any state. So actually, it will be deployed, but it won't be blocking anything. We're just going to be allowing all the traffic. That's where implementing the solution, starting to build in some deny policies via a zone-based segmentation strategy like we're going to roll out here in a moment, can be really, really useful, okay? So a really common way that people would use zone segmentation, and the example I'm going to walk you all through today, is a prod development environment, right? So this would be a situation where you needed to segment prod and dev applications from one another. Now, what I'm not going to walk you through today, which I would say we're going to walk through step 1 when you get the firewall. Well, step 0 would be for you to go ahead and implement some rules and policies around your shared services, okay? I'm not going to cover that because most customers already know what their shared services are, right? That's Active Directory, DNS, NTP. These are your maybe some network scans, some SCCM, whatever you have as systems that need to basically talk to everything. You'd put that in shared services, and you'd go ahead and write some really broad permit rules to say, hey, everybody can talk to DNS, right? Everybody can, talk to our internal NTP as an example. So I'm not going to cover that. Instead, and by the way, the reason I want to cover it is because these are just allow rules, and it's not very risky to implement that. So if you have questions about it, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to your local VMware SE, but just know that this part is really the easiest part. It's when we start talking about actually writing a deny rule, right? That's where we need to do some diligence to make sure that we don't break anything, because we're putting effectively a firewall where one did not exist before, right? And anytime you do that, you need to make sure that you're not going to break stuff, okay? And we'll walk you through how you would do that in some examples here today, okay? So, I already touched a little bit on what zone segmentation is, and here's what I'm going to walk you all through. In my environment, I have 2 very simple applications. They're simple on purpose, so I can walk you through this exercise. I have a prod application, and I have a development application, right? And I'm going to do something very simple. Today, I have what can only be described in my environment as piss-poor segmentation. Okay, what do I have in my environment? I've got this environment, right? I've got this wide open environment where I don't have segmentation between dev and prod, and that's no good because I know that my developers are some pesky son of a guns in there making a lot of changes to that dev application on the fly that I really don't want to have to worry about if those could affect production. So through this exercise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my application boundaries, or my zone boundaries, I suppose I should say, around prod and around dev. And then we're going to simply do some diligence to make sure that I'm not going to break anything. And then we're going to write a deny rule that says very simply, dev systems can't talk to prod, and prod systems cannot talk to dev. Okay? Before I go into the hands-on piece, I just want to take note, right? Some other common examples of a zone-based firewalling use case, right? Test, dev, prod, staging, UAT. These are common use cases, right? But other really common use cases would be like tenancy. So if you host applications or systems for multiple different external clients or customers, you could use this method. It can be used for compliance, so replace dev with PCI or whatever. There's a lot of security appliance requirements out there in the world that say, hey, you have to have network segmentation in place. This allows you to fulfill those requirements, whether it's NIST, DISA, PCI, whatever. Insert compliance standard here, okay? Finally, lines of business. So maybe you support only internal customers, but still you want to segment like an HR app or an HR set of systems from finance systems. We can implement boundaries like that. And another really common one would be DMZ / internal external segmentation, where maybe you want to have a little bit more flexibility and where your DMZ systems live, well, NSX gives you some flexibility in that you don't have to tie the DMZ firewall policy to a particular rack behind a firewall. So you could, in theory, have your DMZ workloads sitting right beside your non-DMZ workloads and still ensure that they are in a secure state, and that the DMZ workloads do have that extra layer of protection that you would expect from a traditional DMZ. Okay. So to get to this state, right, to get to this state where I'm denying traffic between prod to dev and from dev to prod, what do? It takes a few steps. It's really simple. Step one, we're going to create the zone boundary. I'm going to walk you through that. Step two, we write allow rules and we log. The reason we do that, again, you could go in and create groups and make these deny rules day one. You just need to ensure that you know that you're not going to break anything in that process, right? So a lot of times customers will be afraid to flip that to a deny because they think it'll break something. If you follow these steps, you'll be able to validate that nothing will be broken, okay? Step three, in this process, we'll analyze the logs. You'll see it's really easy. 4, we'll add exceptions to the firewall if needed. Sometimes it's needed, sometimes it's not. We'll monitor. You're going to want to let it sit and monitor for a few days to make sure you got everything, right? To make sure you didn't miss anything, any legitimate traffic that you need to add an exception for. And finally, you switch the rules to deny as a final step. And of course, as an optional final step, you can dance. If you feel really happy that you implemented an awesome zone-based security policy in your environment where it wasn't before, I give you permission to dance upon completion of this task. Okay. So as I mentioned, I'm going to switch over into the lab now. I have 2 apps. I have a prod app and a dev app. These apps are basically identical, but you can see I have this one connection here. This connection, I put it there on purpose so that way I can walk you through how we'll implement the exceptions when we need that. Some environments you may not need to add exceptions, depending on, basically if your developers or if your systems are already not communicating with each other. But it's really, it's all too common to see maybe a naughty developer or just basic technical debt that accumulates over time where maybe you do have a dev system or a prod system that just has to cross that boundary. Well, we still give you the flexibility to do that and to write that exception while having your different zones in a deny any state between them. Okay, so I'll walk you through that. In my environment, just to simulate this, I have a database that will randomly query the front end web server of my prod application, so that way you can see how we go through that exception addition process. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the steps. It's not going to take very long. I'm going to hope maybe less than 10 minutes from this point. I'll time myself. I guess we'll find out. So step 1, we create groups for the zone boundaries. Okay, that is step 1. How do we do that in NSX? Well, I'm happy to show you. Okay, I've actually taken the liberty of pre-creating these, and I'll show you what they look like in my environment. What I've done is I have my dev workloads. I've used tags to put my dev VMs in this group. You can use tags. You can add them explicitly. This is not a lesson on how to add stuff to groups in NSX, but there's a lot of flexibility in how you do that. Okay, as you can see, I've got my web server, my app server, my database server in that dev group. Okay, so I've got that defined. I've also got my prod group defined. This is from my production stuff. Again, very similar. I've got my web app, my database server. Okay, if you're curious what these apps actually look like in my environment, they're very simple apps. This is my production application. I can go in and search this database. Here's my dev application. It is an exact copy. I can go in and search my development applications database. Okay, so I've got my rules in place, right? So I've got my zone boundaries in place, meaning I have my groups created, right? Step 2, I need to write an allow rule and turn logging on, okay? This allows us to do analysis and make sure that we don't break anything. That's why we're doing this step. So that allow rule is going to look a little something like this. And by the way, the NSX firewall actually has a section made for zone rules, right? Made for macro segmentation. It's the environment section, okay? So I mentioned briefly earlier, I talked about shared services. You would put your shared services rule in this infrastructure section, right? You can see here I have my permits for AD, DNS, NTP, kind of the common shared services we discussed. For your zone isolation, your zone segmentation, really probably the smartest place to put that would be in the environment section, okay? So I have my zones created, my prod and my dev workloads. So what I've done is, for now, as a preliminary step, what I need to do is put a log rule between my prod and my dev. So if the source is prod and the destination is dev, and vice versa. If the destination is source is dev and the destination is prod, I have these two rules. As you can see, they're applied to the whole firewall. They're also set to allow. I did that because I don't want to break anything yet. I need to make sure I'm not going to break anything when I flip these to deny here in a little bit. Just to show you that logging is turned on, I've turned on logging here. You'll definitely want to turn logging on. If you don't turn logging on, it won't work. This stuff won't show up in LogInsight, okay? You can also enable logging on a section basis here, okay? So I've got my allow rules in place, okay? What I'm going to do briefly, I mentioned that there is this legacy connection. Well, before I take the next step, I'm just going to go ahead and generate that legacy traffic. So to simulate that traffic, it literally, I'm a little lazy. I'm just going to curl that web server a few times from my database, and then we should see logs from this connection, because it's a dev server. We should see logs hitting this rule where the source is dev and the destination is prod, and then that'll allow us to get visibility into that exception. So, all right, step 1 is done. Step 2 is done. Now, step 3, and this is for me the fun part, I get to analyze that traffic in LogInsight, okay? And this is the part where I hopefully something that I've created can help you a little bit. So I have a LogInsight deployment where all of my NSX systems are pointed at this LogInsight server, okay? So that means I'm collecting all the firewall logs in this central location. I've created a dashboard here. It's called my NSX Rule Planner. I could give this to anybody watching the video. Just reach out to me. I'm happy to send you this dashboard. You can upload it to your LogInsight deployment. In order to use the Rule Planner, it's very simple. I go to the dashboard and then I follow the instructions. I'm going to click on this interactive analytics, and then that's going to allow me to parse these logs, okay? So in order to use this effectively, what I need to do is, all I need is the rule ID for the rules that I want to analyze. So first I'm going to start with my production to dev rule, and then I'll do my dev to production rule. So it's 10.2.2.1 and then 10.2.2.2. Okay, so I did my search on 10.2.2.1 and I don't see any traffic in the last 5 minutes. That's actually good. If I take you back to my diagram, as you can see, there is no traffic going from prod to dev, only traffic going from dev to prod. So that's good. That everything checks out, seems legit so far. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch to monitoring this rule. And I'm hoping that I see some of that, that curl traffic, that kind of legacy technical debt that I'm walking you through how to work around. Okay. So go back to LogInsight, and I'm going to search on my second rule here. And would you looky there, I've got some traffic. You see the very top pane here? I've got some traffic hitting that rule, right? I've got the source of that traffic. I've got the destination of that traffic, and I know the port and protocol that traffic is happening on, as well as an account of that traffic. Now, if you watch some of my later videos, or if you're in a production environment, you might see, 10 or 11 of these that you need to write in, depending on, how many, kind of legacy connections that you need to let through. So you just see one here right now, but again, you might have to go through and add a few exceptions depending on what your environment traffic is like. Okay. So I see the exception. So what that tells me is that I need, or I see this hitting the rule rather, I should say. What that tells me is that I need to add an exception before I'm able to flip these to deny, or it's going to break that system. So where do I add that exception? All right. Step number 4 in my process, where do I add the exception? Well, very simply, NSX processes rules from top to bottom, okay? So from the very top rule to the bottom, it takes a packet and it's going to inspect against each and every rule that packet applies to. So since I'm hitting this rule with that exception traffic, the 10.222 rule, what I need to do is click Add Rule. I'm actually going to bring this rule down right above my 10.222 rule, right? I need it to be above that in the firewall logic somewhere, okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be directly above. It just needs to be above on the logic. I'm going to write it directly above because for me, that's where it would make the most sense to put this, okay? So I need to write an exception that meets this logic, right? That says when the source is my dev database and the destination is my prod web server, I need to permit TCP port 443 or HTTPS traffic. Okay, so to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and specify the source. I have a group already created, but you may create your own or add an IP however you see fit. I'm going to say if the source is my dev database and the destination is my prod web, and if the service is HTTPS, then go ahead and permit that, okay? I'm going to publish that rule. And you can see here, everything is still in an allow state, right? All of my rules are still in allow phase, okay? That's on purpose because now I've got my exception added, right? So I've added my exception as far as the logs tell me. And so I need to move on to my next step, which is to monitor, to wait, okay? I'm not going to monitor today in this video as long as I would recommend that you monitor, but you're going to want to monitor for as long as it makes sense for your environment. I would say for most production type of environments, you're going to want to do at least a week because oftentimes you'll have like a weekly backup or something scheduled within a week, but there's no one-size-fits-all rule for how long you need to monitor, but just know you should probably monitor until you're confident that when you flip those rules to deny, you're not going to break anything, okay? So if I go back here, I'm going to refresh this. I don't necessarily expect that this will be gone unless I can, yeah, this is the last 5 minutes. But it's not gone. But one thing you may have noticed happened is the count went from 22 to 4. That's because those logs are starting to fall out of that last 5-minute range. And so what's eventually going to happen is there's not going to be any more traffic hitting this 10.222 rule. Instead, it should now be hitting this 12268 rule. And I can prove that to you. Just to validate, I typed the rule in. I haven't generated any traffic on it, so let me generate a little traffic for you. Oh, actually, I don't know if I have logging turned on. Yep, I didn't. All right, so I'm going to turn on logging, generate a little bit of traffic. Oh, and I probably need to publish that. Yep. Okay, wait for it to publish. All right, cool, it's published. All right, so now if I generate a little bit of traffic, a couple of connections here on port 443, I should, if I go to LogInsight, see that I'm detecting. Do I have this right? 12268. Haha, I do not have it right. Now, 12268. Last 5 minutes. Get my filters correct. Ah, there we go. Okay. You know, it takes a person on the keyboard knowing what they're doing to make this work, by the way. So, yeah, you need to ensure that you have all the right numbers put in place and everything. So anyway, now you can see that rule is being hit by that traffic. So what that tells me is I should be safe to go ahead and switch to deny without having to break anything, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something. So I'm going to go ahead and run a ping. And you'll see I'm pinging the server, right? And I'm going to leave that ping running, okay? So that way you can see what's going to happen. So now if I go back to NSX, I'm going to go ahead and say, guess what? I feel safe. I've waited. I'm so ready to get rid of my piss poor segmentation, and I want to go ahead and start denying between all my prod and my dev stuff. Well, I'm going to take the leap of faith here. I'm going to go ahead and switch these to it's not a leap of faith. It's not a leap of faith because you are smart. and you use logs to confirm that you're not going to break anything, remember? So I'm going to switch these to deny, not take a leap of faith, but I'm going to know that I'm not going to break anything. Click publish. Wait for these to be sent out to the firewall, and what you should now see is my you can see if you look at the latency on the pings, they're not incrementing, right? The ping is now no longer working. I can prove that again by trying to ping again. You'll see nothing will be successful. But, so I can't ping that address, which by the way is the same address I was curling earlier. But can I still curl it? Can I still curl it on HTTPS? I should be able to, because I've written my one exception. So right now, I am, in fact, in this state where I'm denying traffic between dev and prod in both directions, but still allowing this legacy connection through. So I'll prove that to you right now. I'm going to go ahead and run that curl, and you're going to see that legacy connection is absolutely allowed still, even though I am denying all other traffic, pings, whatever, all other traffic I'm denying except for that one legacy connection that I needed to put in place to ensure that I didn't break my systems. Okay. Anything else to say about this before I wrap up? Well, you probably will want to, if you're not a security person yourself and you just don't know, if something's hitting a log, that means that traffic is hitting the log, right? That doesn't necessarily mean it's traffic you want to allow. It could be malicious traffic. There could be a bad actor in your data center, right? So the only thing I'll add is if you run across a log and it just doesn't pass the sniff test, right? If you're like, I'm seeing a lot of connections from this source going to a known Russian IP address, well, hey, I would say that is probably a good signal that you should not write that as an exception and you should do a little further analysis, right? But generally speaking, this is a great way to go ahead and put those exceptions in place, get some visibility into your environment, and operationalize the zone-based firewall in NSX, okay? One last thing I'll show you, just because I can't help it, just because I love whenever I can show you how it works, right? You'll see I'm curling here. The curl was successful, just to prove how important that was. If I wouldn't have added that exception, just kind of further proving that I would have definitely broken the behavior of that application. I've gone ahead and switched that rule to a deny, and now the curl is no more. That curl is never going to get a response, no matter how hard it tries, because that curl is being blocked the second it leaves the virtual NIC of this database virtual machine. Okay, that's it, everybody. We have gone through all of the necessary steps to implement this. I've even showed you how you would add an exception if you do have some technical debt in your environment that doesn't allow you to go right into writing your deny rules. And I walked you through that final step of switching those allow rules to deny, ensuring that you do have a true zone isolation between your various environments without breaking anything. So I hesitate to do this on camera. I'm going to give myself permission to dance as a reward for completing this task. All right, it's optional. Hey, you don't gotta dance. I told you it's optional. Okay. So I hope that this was useful for anybody watching. The next step in the video series, I think, will be to show you how to implement the IDPS, where I may even fast forward and go to Macro-Segmentation just because it is so fun, and loop back into the IDPS later. But in either case, I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that it was helpful. If you need the log analyzer that I showed you in the video, please reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. I can provide you that log analysis dashboard that you can upload to your own LogInsight deployment. If you have any questions about NSX or about implementing NSX, hey, I consider myself pretty good at implementing NSX. I've done it for a while. I've been spending the last probably 4 years working on VMware security solutions. So just reach out if I can help you with anything, whether you're a customer in my territory or not. I'm always happy to answer any questions if it helps you get value out of a tool like this. Okay, so that's all I have to say for now. I appreciate your time. If you have any suggestions of other series or videos you'd like to see from me, just let me know. I'll make it whenever I find time. And happy firewalling. Happy distributed zero trust firewalling, everybody. Bye.